Hey guys, Sebastian here from greenmusicproductions.com. Today's video is going to be in two parts, and it's about compression. I think it's one of the most important videos I've done so far because, in my opinion, EQing and compressing is a huge part of a great mix. So the first part is going to be about the different functions of a compressor, how to use it, how it works, and the second part is going to be actual compression on real instruments. So you will see if you learn to master the compressors, they will become your best friend. So let's dive in. I'll open the mixer by pressing F3. I'll just load the basic Cubase compressor for this because it's simple enough and it has all the functions you will find in a regular compressor. There's also a graphical interface here so we can see what's going on. So that's really useful to understand what the compressor is doing. So first, the threshold. When I move the threshold, as you can see, there's a little dot that's moving right here. So let's pretend the audio file is in the middle of this graphic here. And when the audio reaches the dot, the compressor kicks in. So basically the threshold will tell the compressor when to start compressing. So that's really easy to understand when you see the dot, and just for a visual reference, I'll press play so you'll see the gain right here, and you'll understand that when the gain goes over the dot, then it means the compressor should start compressing. So let's listen to it. So nothing was happening in terms of compression. Because the ratio is set to 1. So the ratio is basically the amount of compression that's going to happen after the threshold is reached. So since it's a ratio, it's usually, right here you only see one number, but usually you see a number to 1. So that would be 3.34 to 1. And what that means is that usually if the audio goes, for example, if we set it to 2 to 1, if the audio goes 2 dB over the threshold, it's going to compress it to 1 dB. If it's set to 4, if it then goes to 4 dB over the threshold, usually, then it will be compressed to 1. So it's basically the amount of compression that's going to happen after the threshold is reached. So that's really useful. The makeup is basically makeup gain. Sometimes you'll just see an output knob. This is basically just an output because when you compress, it lowers the volume of the source. So you can raise the volume to match the volume that it used to be before compression. So the next part right here is really important, especially those two buttons, the attack and release. The attack, it's kind of confusing at first because the attack will tell the compressor when to start attacking after the threshold is reached. So you might not understand why that's useful, but let's say we're compressing a snare drum. So it's a really fast transient snare drum, and we want to keep the snap. We want to enhance the snap of the snare drum. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our threshold so the snare is getting compressed, the ratio, and we'll be able to listen to the snare and see when the snap is not getting compressed, but the compression will kick in right after the snap. So we can basically tweak when the compressor starts with the attack button. So that's really cool. The release will do the exact opposite. It will tell the compressor when to stop compressing, basically. So the slower it is, then the slower the compressor is going to go back to 0. So the hold knob right here, you won't see that very often on compressors. What it does is it will keep the compression going on for at least that amount of time. So let's say the threshold is reached and then the audio source goes under the threshold. It's going to keep compressing the same amount for that amount of time in milliseconds, and then the release will kick in. So that's just to make sure it's going to compress a certain amount of time no matter what happens. The analysis, I'm not too sure exactly what it does in that case. I think it will look forward on the audio file to make sure that the attack can be faster and stuff like that, but you won't see that very often. So yeah, that's about it. Now what I want to talk about, this is what we call a modern compressor, because it's not trying to emulate any real hardware, any vintage compressor. So that's why it has a lot of options, even though it's quite simple. But most of people like to use emulations of real hardware. And the reason why is that this is a really clean compressor. It's not adding any distortion to the sound, any stuff like that. But since the real hardware we're adding things and harmonics and distortion and stuff like that to the signal, people tend to like that. It's really musical. So a lot of companies made some good emulation of those compressors. One of the classic compressor that exists is the LA2A. I'm just going to show you how it looks like, and it's really, really simple to use. This is the wave version, and you only have, well, you have two buttons that are really important right here. But this is the peak reduction. So that's basically moving the threshold. It's a fixed ratio, but that's moving the threshold. And that's the gain. The gain actually should be after the peak. So right now it's on the left, but the signal doesn't go like this. It's basically the peak reduction is happening, and that's just the output gain. So it won't affect the compression. It has an attack of about 10 milliseconds because of the hardware, and a release of about, it will release of about 50% of the compression in 60 milliseconds, and after that it's not really linear, so it's hard to tell depending on the source. So, but the thing you have to remember is that works really well on a lot of stuff. It's really simple. It works well on vocals, bass, so many things. You can try it out if you have any of these. Now I'm going to switch to the 1176. It looks a little similar, but you have the attack, release, and the ratio right here. The input value on this, as you can see, there's no threshold button whatsoever. So what the input does is that on that compressor, there's a fixed threshold that you can't change. But instead of moving the threshold around, we're raising the volume so it will reach that threshold. So basically, if, let's say, I press play to listen to, I think it's a bass guitar right now. So as you can see right now, it's not compressing. And as I raise the input at a certain point, it will start compressing. But because it reaches the threshold that is unknown, but you can see where it is, because when you raise the input at some point, it will start compressing. The output is only the output gain. So if you're compressing a lot, you might want to raise the output so it matches the volume. So the attack and release is there. It works in the same way that I showed you with the other compressor, and the ratio. So that's pretty straightforward. That's a great compressor because it works well on everything, and you have all the main functions here, and it adds something really nice to the sound. So there's a couple of compressors like that, but once you understand the different functions of a compressor, you pretty much know how to use them all. So next video, as I said, I'm going to show you how to use them on actual tracks, and that's really important. You'll see why I'm showing you how to use those functions, and you'll see how they can become your best friend. So thanks for watching. You can check out my website in the description. If you like those videos, like and subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2. Thank you, guys.